Every single day, somebody gets on this platform and lies about something we have crystal clear evidence of. And today, the lie is so brazen, so spectacularly absurd, that it might actually be the most entertaining deception Drake has attempted since this entire feud began. Because what we are about to break down is not just a story about a collaboration that never happened. It is a story about manipulation, loyalty, the petty lengths a billionaire artist will go to in order to divide and conquer, and the moment it all backfired in the most public way imaginable. By the time we reach the end of this breakdown, you are going to see the Toronto rapper in a light that even his most dedicated defenders are going to struggle to spin. And I promise you, every single claim I am about to make is backed by receipts, interviews, and words that came directly from the mouths of the people involved. But before we get into any of that, I need all of you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button. Not because I am begging for engagement, but because every single like on this video sends a message to the people who have been working overtime to bury stories exactly like this one. There are forces in this industry that do not want you to hear this perspective. They want the narrative controlled. They want the truth sanitized. And the only way we keep that from happening is by standing together and making sure this information reaches as many people as possible. So drop that like, subscribe if you have not already, and let us get into what might be one of the most revealing chapters of the entire Drake versus Kendrick Lamar saga. Now, to understand how we arrived at this moment, we need to rewind to April of 2024. At that point, the feud between the OVO founder and Kendrick Lamar was reaching a boiling point that the hip-hop world had not seen in decades. Kendrick had just dropped Euphoria, a 6-minute and 40-second dismantling of the Six God that became the most listened to rap song of the year in a single day. The culture was electrified. Sides were being chosen. Allegiances were being tested. And in the middle of all this chaos, an artist named Lefty Gunplay was rising fast out of California with more hype and momentum than almost anyone on the West Coast at that moment. A lot of people in the industry were calling him the next big artist to break out of Los Angeles. He had the cosign, he had the streets, and most importantly, he had the attention of both camps in this escalating war. And this is where the story takes its first fascinating turn. During an interview with WAC 100, Lefty was asked about the Kendrick Lamar diss record. And in that conversation, the rising California artist casually dropped a revelation that should have changed the entire narrative around Drake's strategy during the beef. He revealed that the Toronto superstar had reached out to him. Not directly, mind you, but through his management. Drake's team had tapped in with Soulja Boy's management, who was connected to Lefty, and expressed interest in doing a collaboration. Now, let that sink in for a moment. In the middle of the most high-profile rap feud of the century, Drake was actively trying to recruit a rising California artist who was being groomed for Kendrick's camp. That is not a coincidence. That is a strategy. And it is a strategy that the Canadian rapper has deployed over and over again throughout his career. And Lefty, to his credit at the time, was remarkably diplomatic about the whole thing. He said he was not going to diss Drake. He gave a shout-out to Drizzy. He even admitted that he bumps his music. But he also made it clear where his heart was. He said Kendrick is LA, because here is what we know about the OVO star's playbook. This has been his modus operandi for his entire career. He identifies artists who are on the rise, artists who have regional momentum and cultural cash, and he reaches out to collaborate. On the surface, it looks like generosity. It looks like a superstar lifting up the next generation. But when you examine the timing and the targets, a very different picture emerges. This is not charity. This is chess. Just look at the pattern. Drake has done this with Iceman. He just did a record with Molly Santana and Stunna Sandy. He supports women in rap, which is admirable on its face. But when you zoom out and look at the totality of who he chooses to work with, and when he chooses to work with them, a consistent thread appears. The collaborations almost always coincide with moments where the Six God needs to expand his cultural footprint or neutralize a potential threat. And in the context of the Kendrick Lamar feud, reaching out to Lefty becomes even more calculated. Because if Drake could pull a rising West Coast artist into his orbit during the height of a beef with the biggest West Coast rapper alive, that would not just be a musical win. That would be a cultural and psychological victory. It would send the message that even Kendrick's own backyard was not fully behind him. It would create a narrative crack that the Toronto artist could exploit for months. But here is where the story shifts in a way that nobody saw coming. Later in 2024, Kendrick Lamar did what Kendrick does. He surprised the entire world with the surprise drop of GNX. No warning. No rollout. No months of teasing. Just an album that arrived like a thunderclap and instantly reshaped the conversation. And when the tracklist was revealed, the hip-hop community discovered that Kendrick had put Lefty on his album. Not on a throwaway skit or a bonus cut. On a major, flagship release from one of the most important artists of our generation. And the effect on the young California rapper was immediate and profound. Almost overnight, the man who had been carefully diplomatic, who had refused to pick sides, who had given shout-outs to both camps, transformed into something entirely different. Lefty went from saying he was not picking sides between Drake and Kendrick to declaring, with absolute conviction, that he would never do a record with the Toronto rapper. In subsequent interviews, his energy was completely different. When asked about Drake's defamation lawsuit against Universal Music Group over Not Like Us, Lefty did not hesitate. He said he was loyal. He said he was Team Kendrick now. And when the interviewer pointed out that Kendrick Lamar had chosen him out of everybody in the world, his response was raw gratitude. He said he felt blessed. He called Kendrick his friend. He mentioned going to the TD compound and working with the team there. He said they embraced him like family. And then came the line that sealed it. Lefty looked into the camera and said, "You will never see me do a song with Drake." Not probably not. Not I do not think so. Never. He said it twice. He said he could not. And when pressed, when the interviewer asked him directly, if the OVO star called you and said he needed you on a song, you would say no, his response was devastating. He said Drake already did call. And he turned him down. Now, this is where we need to pause and examine something critical. Because the implications of that statement are enormous. Lefty was not just expressing a personal preference. He was exposing a behind-the-scenes power play that Drake's team had been running. And when you combine his account with what his manager and producer later revealed on a podcast, the picture becomes even clearer. According to Lefty's team, after the Grammys, a producer from OVO, at first, his team entertained the idea. But when OVO started asking them to send over what they were working on, when the conversation started feeling less like a genuine collaboration and more like a transactional arrangement, Lefty's team made a decision that speaks volumes about their character. They stopped communicating. Not because they were angry. Not because they were posturing. But because, in their own words, they did not want to be a paid prop in the beef between Kendrick and Drake. Let me repeat that, because it is one of the most important revelations in this entire saga. Lefty Gunplay's team explicitly stated that they refused to be used as a paid prop in the beef. They understood exactly what was happening. They saw the chess move for what it was. And even when offered what they described as a six-figure bag, they walked away. They said they were men of value. They said they would get the money themselves. That is not just loyalty. That is integrity in an industry that rarely rewards it. And it stands in stark contrast to the way Drake has historically operated, where every relationship is transactional and every collaboration is a lever to pull. And the evidence that the Toronto rapper had genuine interest in Lefty does not stop there. About a month before GNX dropped, the rising West Coast artist posted a screenshot showing that Drake had liked one of his videos. Now, think about that timing. The Six God, in the middle of a feud with Kendrick Lamar, is actively liking content from an artist who is about to appear on Kendrick's album. Either he was monitoring the situation closely, or his team was keeping tabs on artists they considered strategic acquisitions. Either way, the interest was real. The engagement was documented. And the denial that would come later contradicts all of it. But before we get to that denial, let us talk about the broader pattern, because the Lefty Gunplay situation does not exist in a vacuum. Remember the song Too Hot for Radio from the Iceman album? That was the track where Drake dissed Kendrick and Mustard, the producer whose sound defined GNX. And for a brief moment, the strategy actually appeared to work. People were conflicted. We saw industry figures like DJ Head saying they would not play the record. There was a window where the divide-and-conquer approach seemed to be gaining traction. And it is entirely possible that Too Hot for Radio was originally supposed to feature Lefty on it. Think about the timeline. Drake's team reaches out to the rising California artist. He likes his content. Then Lefty ends up on Kendrick's GNX album instead. And suddenly, the OVO camp releases a diss track targeting Kendrick and Mustard. The connection is not hard to see. When Drake saw Lefty appear on Kendrick's album, that is when the calculation changed. That is when the interest evaporated. That is when the story shifted from wanting to work with him to pretending the Canadian rapper never wanted to work with him at all. Because now we arrive at the most explosive moment in this entire timeline. Fast forward and Adam 22 is on his show with Whack 100. And during this conversation, Adam reveals something that he says came directly from a text exchange with Drake. According to Adam, the Toronto superstar had texted him about something unrelated, and Adam, not wanting to waste a celebrity's time with trivial questions, decided to ask one pointed, strategic question. He asked whether it was true that Lefty had turned him down for a collaboration. And the response, as Adam tells it, was blunt, dismissive, and revealing beyond measure. Drake allegedly said, "Why would I want to do a song with Lefty Gunplay?" Now, on the surface, that might sound like a simple denial. But when you place it in the context of everything we have just laid out, it becomes something much more significant. It becomes a lie. And not just any lie. It is the kind of lie that reveals exactly how the OVO founder operates when he feels cornered. Instead of acknowledging that his team reached out, instead of admitting that there was at least some level of interest, Drake chose to rewrite history. He chose to frame Lefty as someone beneath his consideration, someone he would never even think about working with. And that response tells us two things. First, it tells us that he was stung by the rejection. When the young West Coast artist chose Kendrick over him, it bruised his ego in a way that he clearly has not recovered from. And second, it tells us that his first instinct when embarrassed is to gaslight the public into believing the embarrassment never happened. That is not confidence. That is insecurity wearing a confidence mask. But here is where the truth becomes undeniable. We have Lefty's own words on camera stating that Drake's management reached out. We have his producer confirming that OVO producers contacted them and invited them to Calabasas. We have a screenshot of the Six God liking his content. We have a documented pattern of Drake collaborating with up-and-coming artists as a strategic move. We have the timeline that connects all of these data points into a coherent narrative. And yet, he wants us to believe that he would never even consider working with Lefty Gunplay. The audacity of that claim is staggering, even by Drake's standards. And it is exactly the kind of behavior that has eroded the goodwill he once had with the culture. Now, I want to be fair here for a moment, because there is a narrow possibility that deserves consideration. It is possible, however unlikely, that the Toronto rapper himself did not personally authorize his producers to reach out to Lefty. In the music industry, producers do sometimes initiate conversations with other artists without explicit approval from the headliner. But even if that were the case, and I emphasize the word if, it would still mean that Drake's own team believed the rising California artist was someone worth pursuing. It would still mean that the interest existed within the OVO camp at an organizational level. And it would still make his dismissive response to Adam 22 a misrepresentation of what actually happened behind the scenes. You cannot have your team pursuing an artist and then publicly pretend you have no idea who they are or why they would be relevant to you. But let us be real for a second. In the overwhelming majority of cases, producers do not reach out to other artists for collaborations without getting the green light from the artist they are working with. That is not how the industry operates at the highest levels. Drake is not some hands-off figurehead who has no idea what his team is doing. He is one of the most controlling, meticulous artists in the history of hip-hop. Every move is calculated. Every collaboration is strategic. Every public interaction is curated. The idea that his producers went rogue and pursued Lefty without his knowledge strains credibility to the breaking point. We are talking about an artist who reported Drake wanted to pull someone from Kendrick's sphere of influence into his own. He wanted to plant a flag in enemy territory and say, "Look, Even the people around Kendrick are willing to work with me. It was never about music. It was about messaging. It was about perception. It was about the same propaganda game that Toronto rapper has been playing since the moment he realized he was losing the cultural war. And when the strategy failed, when Lefty chose loyalty over leverage, his response was not to respect the decision. It was to erase the evidence and pretend the approach never happened. But here is the beautiful irony of this entire situation. By denying that he ever wanted to work with Lefty, Drake actually did more damage to his own reputation than if he had simply admitted it. Because now, everyone who has been paying attention can see the contradiction. We have the receipts. We have the interviews. We have the screenshots. We have the testimony from Lefty, his manager, his producer, and Adam 22. And all of it points to the same conclusion. The Avio star wanted to work with the rising California artist. His team made the move. And when it failed, Drake lied about it. That is not spin. That is not interpretation. That is what the evidence shows when you lay it all out on the table. This is the part where the story transcends hip-hop beef and becomes something larger. Because what we are really talking about here is power. The power dynamics between a global superstar with unlimited resources and a rising artist from Los Angeles who had a choice to make. Lefty could have taken the money. He could have taken the feature. He could have ridden the fence and played both sides, collecting checks from Drake while maintaining a loose affiliation with Kendrick. That is what a lot of artists would have done. That is what the industry rewards. That is what the system is designed to encourage. But he did not. He chose a side. He chose loyalty. He chose the culture over the bag. And in an era where so much of what we see is calculated, manufactured, and performative, that choice stands out like a beacon. And Kendrick Lamar, for his part, recognized that. He put Lefty on GNX not because it was a strategic countermove to the OVO Camp's overture, but because he saw genuine talent and genuine loyalty in someone who was not willing to be bought. That is the difference between these two artists at a fundamental level. One views collaboration as a weapon of division. The other views it as a reward for integrity. One sees people as chess pieces to be positioned. The other sees them as artists worth elevating on their own merits. And the fact that we are still dissecting this dynamic years later speaks to how profound the cultural impact of this feud has been. This is not just rap. This is a referendum on what we value as a culture. Do we value authenticity or do we value spectacle? Do we reward loyalty or do we reward proximity to power? Now, there is one more layer to this that I think deserves examination, and it has alternative narratives are seeded. Doubt is manufactured. And the truth gets buried under an avalanche of noise and deflection. But here is the thing about the truth. It does not need a propaganda machine to survive. It does not need an army of defenders to persist. It just needs people who are willing to look at the evidence and draw honest conclusions. And in this case, the truth is simple. Drake's team reached out to Lefty. The rising West Coast artist chose Kendrick instead. And the Toronto superstar, unable to handle the rejection, pretended it never happened. That is the story. That is what the evidence supports. And no amount of spin, no amount of denial, no amount of dismissive texting to podcast hosts is going to change the facts that are already on the record. And let me add one more observation, because I think it is important. The way Drake dismissed Lefty in that response to Adam 22 is telling in a way that goes beyond this single incident. When he said, "Why would I want to do a song with Lefty Gunplay?" he was not just denying the approach. He was devaluing the artist. He was sending a message to every up-and-coming artist who might be watching. The OVO founder was saying, if you cross me, do you believe the Toronto rapper was genuinely trying to work with Lefty, or do you think the rising California artist and his team fabricated the whole thing? Do you think Drake's response to Adam 22 was a calculated lie or an honest reaction? And more broadly, what do you think this reveals about how the Six God operates behind the scenes when the cameras are off and the PR team is not in the room? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I read every single one of them and I want to know where you stand on this. If you made it to this point in the video, you're a legend. Hit that like button one more time. Subscribe if you have not already. And if you want to see more breakdowns like this one, the videos on your screen right now are exactly what you